Good evening. It is October 27th and it is 7 p.m. Welcome to the Public Safety and General Government Committee. We will start with roll call. We have John McMurray, Chair. I am present. Heidi Alterman, I believe, is going to join us later. Nicole Ayers. I see she's here, but I think she's getting hooked up to audio. Josh.
Here.
Oh, thank you. Councilmember Ayers. Councilmember Goldstein is absent this evening. Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, I'm here.
Councilmember Meek. I don't see him. And Councilmember Revolus.
Here.
Thank you so much. So we will start with the acceptance of the minutes from the August 24th meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Does anybody have any changes or corrections to the August 24th meeting minutes? No, seeing none and hearing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Any abstentions or opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. I also want to make note for the minutes that Councilmember Meek has joined us at 7:01 p.m. All right, we will open it up for public participation. Is there anybody here who would like to address the council?
There is not.
Great, thank you so much. So we will go ahead and close public participation. That is easy. For new business, we have a few items from the police department this evening. I will read 1A and 1B together. 1A, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute and all document and instruments as may be necessary to apply for and accept grant funding under the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation fiscal year 2023 comprehensive DUI enforcement program not to exceed $50,000, account TBD. And 1B, authorize the chief of police to execute any and all agreements, documents, instruments, and amendments as may be necessary to implement the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation fiscal year 2023 comprehensive DUI enforcement grant not to exceed $50,000, account TBD. Do I have a motion?
Moved.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Johnson. We have Deputy Chief Zecca here to speak to these items. I don't know if anybody has any questions or if you want to give us any background on this before we move forward.
So this is our standard DUI grant for DUI enforcement that we get from the state. We've gotten it for many years. And it just allows us to put extra patrols out at certain times in the evenings for DUI enforcement. Obviously, we all know that that's dangerous to have somebody who's impaired driving on the road, and the enforcement helps to curb that behavior.
Does anybody have any questions about these two items? No? Okay, seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you so much. 2A, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute and all document and instruments as may be necessary to apply for and accept grant funding under the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation fiscal year 2023 click it or ticket enforcement grant not to exceed $10,000, account TBD. And 2B, authorize the chief of police to execute any and all agreements, documents, instruments, and amendments as may be necessary to implement the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation fiscal year 2023 click it or ticket enforcement grant not to exceed $10,000, account TBD. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Ayers. Any further information you want to provide on this, Deputy Chief Zecca?
Again, this is also a yearly grant that we've gotten from the state of Connecticut. Provides for seatbelt enforcement. There's two waves, one in November, so there'll be a period during November that we do enhanced enforcement, as well as May into June. So this just provides funding for that.
Great. Any questions regarding these two items? Love it. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
That
Aye.
passed unanimously as well. Thank you so much. Number 3A, authorize the purchasing agent Sharon Connors to issue a purchase order on behalf of the Police Department, Faro Technologies, Inc. for the purchase of Faro Focus Premium Scanner and related equipment and software as per sole source procurement request for an amount not to exceed $110,000, account noted. Do I have a motion?
So move, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ayers. Turning it back over to you, Deputy Chief Zeka.
So as you know, we have funding in our capital budget for this item. Has been, we've been seeking this for many years. And I actually have Lieutenant Weisgerber is on the meeting as well. He's the commander of our ID unit, and he'll be using this equipment. So I will let him explain it further.
Welcome.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
good. So basically what we're looking to do is upgrade our forensic mapping equipment from equipment that we're now using from 2010, which is actually surveyor equipment that had some modifications to be used by police departments to do 2D and 3D diagrams. But I don't know if anybody's ever seen us out at the scenes when we have the road shut down or the scene shut down. We have to map each individual point with a prism pole and a sight. So you have to sight it, shoot it, map it, and it's a point. So if I'm going to do curbing, double yellow lines, all that type of stuff, every 8 steps, you have to map it again, map it again, map it again. So some of the bigger scenes, we may map 180 to 230 points are manually mapped, then bring it back and all you have are points and lines. Then you have to do all the symbol work, drawing work to assemble it into a 2D, 3D diagram. So we got that equipment in 2010. The problem is the data collector and download system is a Windows Mobile Device Center, which is only supported up to Windows 7 platform. There is nothing beyond that. So besides that, all the technology has gone to Faro now. They actually they have the scanners, and what they are, they're 2D, 3D scanners that scan 2 million points per second, either outdoors or indoors. So they actually do a 2D, 3D virtual replica of the room or the environment you're standing in, and they do it in about 11 to 12 minutes per scan. So at a car accident, you have to get on both sides of the car to get all the detail of the car. But doing that, it's only about 11 minutes per scan, and you're going to grab it. You're grabbing millions of points that I can never grab manually mapping them with a point system. Faro also bought a couple of years ago the CAD Zone software system that we're using currently for the older system, which is CAD Zone. So some of the software we already have, it would be integrated, but the biggest thing with Faro and the difference with them from any other scanners, most of the other scanners out on the market are reverse engineering. You would almost do a 3D scan of a piece of equipment or an engine block, and then the engineers re-engineer it backwards from the scan. They don't have the software to then do a scene and then turn it into a 2D, 3D diagram for court or for accurate measurements and for doing skid analysis, crush analysis, and all this other type of technology. So really the biggest thing is I cannot duplicate the work that this machine can do in gathering 2D, 3D. And it's like, so besides outdoor work, if we did like a raised ranch or a split level, this has the ability to go from the bottom family room up the stairs into the living room and into the bedrooms, integrated into one 3D diagram that you can actually walk through and do virtual tours. So what it is with this company, besides it's a scanner, nobody touches their software that then takes the scene and integrates it into the diagrams, where I would end up putting some symbols on it and doing like the finish work, and it travels to court on a CD. I don't have to bring proprietary software on a laptop to try to show it. It can just be given to the prosecutors and the defense on a CD, and it's much cleaner. The other thing, it's absolutely unbiased documentation of a crime scene. we're not picking and choosing what to map and what point to make. It scans 11 minutes, grabs everything in that room or area. So it's amazing at what the detail. And we're a little bit behind on a curve. Pretty much everybody around us has it already. Waterbury has 2. All the state police run all their crash units and crime scene units with it also. So it's kind of the technology of the future is actually here for a couple of years now.
Well, it's impressive that you're able to do what you do without this right now. Does anybody have any questions regarding this item? Yes, Councilmember Meek.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I'm going to abstain from voting on this just because of a personal conflict. But I'm happy about Faro. I just own too many shares to be ethically onto a vote.
Okay, thank you. Now, you said that Waterbury has 2 of these. Ideally, I mean, we're getting 1 if we vote on this evening and move it to full council. Ideally, in an ideal world, how many would you have?
We'd only need the 1 because the
Okay.
training, we can train up to 6 officers, and we're going to be including our accident investigators with the training, which we already go out with them now and assist them at fatal scenes with the equipment we have.
Okay.
Included in it, besides the main scanner, there's a secondary scanner. It's called a Freestyle, which is handheld. It allows you to do accident cars where you can do the crush on the front end,
Mhm.
and you can map it. Then you can also go to the same car without damage, map it, and overlay them on top of each other, get your inches in crush. And then if a scene where you don't have skid marks for minimum speed, the crush measurements will actually allow you to get minimum speed at impact for the accidents also. So it's the main scanner, then there's a Freestyle handheld one, and everybody's going to be kind of cross-trained in it. So one system would definitely suffice.
That's great. Any other questions or comments? I'm seeing or hearing none. I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor, please aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I believe that is unanimous. Thank you so
Abstain.
much. Oh, and I'm sorry, I apologize.
No worries.
Councilmember Meek is abstaining. Are there any objections to this? I should also call for that. Okay, great. So we have 1 abstention and the rest are voting in favor. So thank you so much. I'm excited you guys
All
are going
right.
to.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Night, thank you. So that's it for action item this evening. Been working on a presentation. I'm trying to have it for many months now on illegal apartments and the definition of what an illegal apartment is, and just sort of how you report activity that you may think is an illegal apartment, who you report that to, and then also how that's enforced. So we've invited Steve Kleppen tonight. We also have Jess Vonacek on the call. And I think Steve's going to walk us through just sort of the definitions of these 3 points. And if anybody has any questions, of course, we can bring those up as well. So Mr. Kleppen, thank you so much for joining us and for your
Sure.
patience. I know we started talking about this back in January, you and I, so I'm glad we can finally get it on the agenda. And I will hand it over to you.
Sure. So I don't have anything formally prepared in terms of like a presentation.
That's okay.
So please ask me any questions at any point in time. I think there's just a couple of things just to kind of clarify to some of the points that you raised. First and foremost, there's different things to consider. One is whether we're talking about like a single family or a 2-family house, because there's a different jurisdictional issue with those. So if you have a multifamily, which would be 3 or more, then you can fall under the jurisdiction of the fire marshal and or the health department with licensing and permitting requirements. 1 and 2-family house, those 2 bodies don't have the ability to get involved with any issues on those properties or inspect. So that's would be where the big difference would lie on that. And so I'll start with, I guess, with the 1 and 2-family house, because and again we can go through the different issues. But with a 1 and 2 family, we don't have the ability to get onto anybody's property. I think that's the most important point to consider. Even so, say we drive by, we get a complaint, there's 8 cars parked all over the property. There's 5 satellite dishes, just kind of looks funny. You know, people are saying there's people coming and going from the back of the property. There's all kinds of issues and concerns raised. We don't have the ability to go on their property and knock on the door and say, hey, what's going on here? What we can do is if we have complaints about, say that somebody suspects there's an apartment or something, or like a rooming house, for example, is kind of similar on that front, we would have to send an inspection request, and that would ask the property owner to let us onto the property based on the complaint or concern that's been raised. But if they deny us access to that property, we don't have really any means to get into that property. There has to be, and so just for background, a couple of years ago, we brought in one of the state housing prosecutors to talk about these kind of issues and what our ability was. So say the property owner wasn't being cooperative, we were getting consistent complaints. There's other recourses where we could try to establish getting onto the property through the court system, but basically the housing prosecutor told us, the kind of evidence that you're citing and that you may see on the property is not going to fly with the court, and it's not going to get you into the property. You're not going to get a warrant to get in and look at the property. There's none of that's going to happen. What we try to do, for additional measures, because we don't just throw our hands up and say, oh well, we tried. We'll do things like we'll try to look for advertisements for an apartment, because sometimes they get advertised either through, sometimes it could even be through Airbnb, or it's through Facebook or another site that's advertising rental units. So we'll look there. We also put something we have a computer tracking software system for our permitting. So if and when at some point in time they try to sell the property or they want to get a permit to do something, we at that point can flag that, wait a minute, we have a complaint from 3 years ago of an illegal apartment. Before you get any permit or before we take any steps forward on this property, we want to verify what's legal there and what's not legal there. Other thing I should mention is related to that is the tax assessor oftentimes will note that there's an apartment on a piece of property. Basically, all that is the assessor is at one point in time is doing a walkthrough, maybe there's a reval or something. They've gotten access to the property. They've determined that there is a unit there, and all they're doing is taxing them on what they see. They're not making any determination regarding legality, but that doesn't even give us the right to go in and enter or be suspicious. But what works once in a while is we get a complaint from a tenant, or we get an affidavit from somebody that's been inside that unit. That's kind of hard to do. You need to have a willing and cooperative party at that point in time. So that's why it really makes it difficult for us to get in and get access to those units, even if we suspect it. It's different when you get into the multifamily scenario, because the health department and fire marshal have the ability to get into those units if they suspect something, and also in terms of licensing requirements for multifamily, that there's different thresholds in terms of what's required. So the health department and fire marshal, we've had a really good relationship, and even better lately with them when they suspect something. So they'll go out and do an inspection and they'll say, wait a minute, we found a basement unit and an attic unit. Our records only show that there's supposed to be 3 and we've counted 5. So they'll come back to us and, we set up oftentimes a joint inspection where we'll go out together and write down everything that's there. But the planning and zoning department is the one that determines what's legally allowed to be on the property. So that's when we trace back the permit history on the property. We look at the land, available land, and look at what the allowable density is. We'll also, sometimes we go back and we do look at the historic tax cards as well, because sometimes there's say in 1980, it shows 2 units on the property. And then in 1995, all of a sudden there's 2 more units. And like, well, wait a minute, there were no permits pulled between 1980 and 1995. How did these 2 units get there? So then they have to come back and prove to us how these units came into existence. And so there's a lot of fact checking and kind of behind the scenes work that goes in on those things. But I think the one thing we hear a lot from the public is that, there's all this activity going on. There's these cars parked there. It looks like there's something going on. But with a single family or two family house, our options are, our hands are tied a little bit because there are property rights that go along with those two types of properties. That's kind of like the big picture overview on things. And I'm sure you have specific questions on things you've heard from constituents over time or questions that, you may have collected on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like that's a lot of work to put on you guys on top of your regular jobs as well. I mean, especially going through listings of apartments or going through the fact checking scenarios that you just mentioned. I mean, how many people do you have on your team to sort of divvy this up? And how many complaints on average are you usually getting?
Sure. So we have, there's one person who's kind of main function, that's John Hayducky. He's the deputy zoning enforcement officer. And his kind of one of his main jobs is really handling enforcement. We kind of divvied that up over the years to space out the permitting aspect of it versus the enforcement end of it. So we have a standard operating procedure set up for permitting. For enforcement itself. So it starts basically when we get the complaint to seeing it through to either a resolution or B, to the legal process. And the legal process, we can talk about that as well. That can go in a couple of different directions. We do have a citation process where we have a citation officer who is a local attorney that volunteers his time, usually about 2 afternoons, sometimes 1 afternoon a month, to hear enforcement cases. And it's a pretty detailed and specific legal process we have to go through to follow that. But outside of John Hayducky, we have probably, I'd say, 2 other individuals who spend partial time doing enforcement. Their function on that is probably more so on the inspection side of things versus the actual processing of the complaints and violations, because there's a whole detailed step that we have to go through with that in terms of following statutory timelines as well as following notice timelines. So we have to make sure that the individual that has the complaint got notice, they received the notice, as opposed to we just mailed it and on the date we use a constable to verify those things. So there's a lot of steps involved with that piece. I have numbers on the number of complaints we've received a year, as well as how broken down by illegal apartments, if you find that helpful.
I think it would be interesting just to hear those numbers. I don't know if you need time to pull those up or not. Councilmember Ayers looks like she has her hand raised as well.
Sure. So I can give you just like big picture numbers.
That'd be great.
And so on a typical calendar year, it averages about 125 complaints that we receive. And I think about 2 weeks ago when I asked for the 2022 calendar year, we were about 111. So, we'll fall right within that time frame. Let's see. Number of outstanding confirmed violations. So this means that there's items that are in the different queue from different complaints on, and that ranges the gambit from illegal apartments to parking in the front yard to motor vehicle violations. There's over 400 in the kind of queue at different stages of action, I should say. The ones that are actually confirmed outstanding complaints is probably around 200 or so, a little over that. And I think in around illegal apartments, the range is on an annual basis about 25 to 30 a year. This year, we've gotten about 25. So again, we'll probably hit that number again. On an average year, we close out about 59 different complaints that come in a year. And then there's a little distinction here, and we close out about 73 violations a year. So we get a lot of complaints that aren't necessarily zoning complaints. If they come in and it comes in as a zoning complaint, but it's not really a zoning issue. But we close out about 73 zoning violations per year.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Councilmember Ayers.
Thank you. I'm the representative from District A, and particularly the residents in the Spring Hill area. I don't know if you're familiar with that area that's behind the Lowe's off of Connecticut Avenue,
Yep.
going towards Jefferson School. We have received a lot of concerns from our constituent in that area, as well as in the I'm drawing a blank. Oh my gosh. The area behind Duchess on Main Avenue. I'm driving. I can't think of the street right now, but many concerned residents have reached out about them feeling too many people are in, one location. There are people doubling down. And from the presentation that you gave, and thank you for giving that presentation, I hear you saying that there's limitations to enforcement and there's limitations to what you can do, but in a safety perspective, in a human, I can't think right now, in a safety perspective, what can the council do? Do we need to do ordinances? What can we do? Because this is a persistent situation and you don't want to get to the point where, God forbid, there's a fire or there's something, and all these people have been in these, what we're saying, illegal apartments, and it's a bad problem. I am sensitive and I do understand for the work that I do that some people are in illegal apartments because that's all they can afford. And so I think this council is aware that we do have a housing situation in Norwalk, particularly an affordable housing situation in Norwalk. So I'm not asking these questions not aware that housing is a problem in Norwalk, but it is still a safety concern for many people. How should we address that with our constituents?
So there's just to note, there is a distinction between occupancy and illegal apartments, because I know sometimes the lines get a little blurred there. So our regulations define family. So, and this is also, it's really important to note that the state statute also defines family. So our definition of family, basically, it's any number of individuals related by blood or marriage. So, and there are, I think the trend has been, whether it's because of the high housing costs or just cultural changes, that there are more people oftentimes residing in a residence than, we typically had thought of previously. So you could have, a typical family of 4, plus they could have, a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, 3 cousins, an aunt and an uncle, all living in a single family house. And that's completely legal. There's nothing the city could do via ordinance or anything else to stop that. And our regulations do allow for up to, and I believe it's up to 3 unrelated individuals. That change happened a couple of years ago. We actually used to allow more unrelated individuals to reside within a residence. But we had an issue on a property, so we cut that back. And part of the decision making behind that, we did a lot of research on what all the other towns were doing, and 3 we felt was more conservative and more appropriate based on the kind of things we were looking at. For the illegal apartments, once we can confirm, and if we can confirm that there's an illegal apartment there, then it's much easier for us to take action. So we know there's one there. We've got evidence of it. We'll put that property through the citation process, and we can put pressure on them to correct the violation. I don't know if there is something you can do on the ordinance end. One of the things on my to-do list, there is a new housing prosecutor for our area. So we were going to have another conversation with them to see if they'd come in and talk to staff about, kind of things we're seeing and what the law allows, and if there are changes that we can make. So we're happy to, effort that, because I know, illegal apartments, for the point you raised, the biggest concern would be if there was a fire within an illegal unit and somebody, there was a loss of life because of that. That would be, a tragedy and a real concern on our end as well.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Ayers, before we move on?
Yes and no. I think it's just not a yes or no answer. And so I respect the answer that was given by Mr. Kleppen. I just feel that I don't know if it's awareness. We need to make people aware, or I just feel like there may be something that we can do that we're not doing. But I'll continue to listen to the rest of my colleagues, and maybe I'll get that from one of them. But I just think that we don't want our residents to be unsafe or to be in safe situations. And when I hear illegal, and that might be from my own naivete, I'm thinking about apartments, not just for families, but apartments that were built without going through the proper zoning precautions, like somebody adding on to their home and stuff like that. I kind of classify that as illegal too, but maybe that's me not quite understanding the definitions.
That scenario is, I'd say it's less common than somebody adding on to their building without a permit. It's easier to catch because somebody usually inquires, or they get caught by a building inspector, for example, if they're doing work. It's the ones that are harder for us to know about or catch, and the ones that I think are the most problematic are the ones that are like an illegal basement unit. We had staff was out recently on one that he showed me pictures of, one that was in this basement with, like, I don't even know if it had 5 feet of ceiling space in there, and it was behind like a boiler, and it was just completely an uninhabitable space that should never have been occupied. So if we can get confirmation that there's an illegal apartment there, then we can take swift action. And illegal apartments and rooming houses are two of the items that we prioritize in terms of enforcement. You know, we lump contractor yards and automobile repair as well. There are other items we don't, some, people don't like parking in the front setback as one issue, but that's more of a quality of life issue versus a safety issue. So we do prioritize the safety issues.
Councilmember Meek?
Thank you. So my question goes to the boundaries of zoning and assessment. I believe per Connecticut statute, it's up to the assessor to determine how many apartments qualifies for what has to be declared on an income statement to the city every year. Those reports are due June 1st to the city. I know firsthand Fairfield requires any buildings with 3 or more units to file, and Norwalk, I believe, is 4. Does zoning, whose purview is that? Is that zoning's, or is that the assessors? Could that number, I believe that number can be lowered. What's your idea or opinion on that? And then my second question would be, why couldn't you subpoena water bills to determine usage at a property, to determine, based on statistics, how many people are living there? Thanks.
Sure. I think to your first question, I think that's more the assessor. We define multifamily as 3 or more. So that's how our regulations define it. So, and how we determine, so each zoning district has a whole series of allowed uses. Certain zones only allow single families, some zones allow smaller multifamily, and some allow, like SONO allows dense multifamily, for example. And when you allow multifamily per our zoning code, it's based on how big your lot is. And we divide that lot area up by a density factor. And it just depends on the zone, what that factor is. To your second question, I would have to check with the law department to see if that's something we legally could do. My guess is from our prior conversation with the housing prosecutor, that would not be something we could do, but I mean, I'm happy to ask that question.
Please do. I know other towns are doing that. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Alterman?
Hi, I just had like I think maybe steps of advice type of question about a situation. So I'm specifically going to use an example from 2 years ago because I know the particular family no longer lives in the location. When I've been asked, like from school or, other neighborhood endeavors of helping people in need, there was a situation where I was delivering like boxes of food and clothing to a family. And when I got to the residence, there were two full families, like each family had 6 or more people living in one room, separated by a curtain. And when I entered the room and it was December, I thought it was really warm in the room. And then they told me, like, in their best way, to be careful where I was walking around the apartment because they kept the oven door open to heat their apartment. And I did my best to like not offend them with my sort of expression of what I felt, but I really was very upset by this. And then they said that the landlord turns off their heat if anybody in the building hasn't paid their rent on time. And I was like, okay, how many people live here? And she was like, well, in this room, we have our 2 families. And there was like 6 families within a 1-family building. So it sounds like after listening to your explanation of like illegal apartments, technically, if they own a 1-family dwelling, there's nothing you can do unless somebody either makes an outside complaint or a resident within makes a complaint. Do I understand it?
That's part of it. There are other things too, like if they, for example, we're seeking to get a permit for something and we had suspicion, we would verify that through inspection and plans. If we had other means to get information about the legality of something that was there, then we could proceed with that as well.
Well,
But
it's
we need, and this goes for all enforcement, whether it's illegal apartments or whatever someone's suspecting. The courts, when, like, if we get to the point where we have a really bad actor and we have to take some civil action on them, we really need to have proof that we've obtained. Like, for example, we can't go out and use drone footage of something and say, we spotted this in the backyard. We have to physically get on the property and see it. And oftentimes that means getting permission to get on the property. So that sometimes we have to follow steps that don't seem appropriate or fair, but that's just, the way the courts have viewed things.
No, and I understand. And I respect the city's willingness to respect the law. So my question of like advice was, in that situation, I obviously felt some type of need to protect them, but not knowing what to do. I discussed it with somebody that knew the family, and she was like, please don't say anything. They'll kick them out. Like, they won't take care of the problem. He won't just turn on the heat. They'll just kick them out, knowing that like some of the families that live there are undocumented. Many of them, even if they have papers, they don't speak English, and they are nervous that other landlords just won't rent to them, or they have unestablished credit, etc. So I'm like, what I did was referred them to the housing authority, because I was like, there was a lady, this was 2 years ago. I really trusted her ability to help with the kind of help they were looking for, not sort of telling them what to do. Is there anything that can be done to protect somebody in that type of situation where like a report could be made about safety? I mean, it was terrifying to me. There were children living where they were using their oven to heat the place. I don't know what a person could do and still ensure that family, like if that landlord kicks them out, does the city have somewhere for them to go while they figure out what to do with them?
Yeah, this a little bit outside of my area, but I know of a couple recent examples of, and I don't have the address up top of my head, but I know there was 2 in South Norwalk. One that was, and it's easier, again, very important to distinguish between multifamily and single family. So this scenarios I'm talking about were multifamily properties where there was an inspection made, and I can't remember who was initiated by the fire marshal's office or the health department, but one of them had flagged some illegal units. There was a second joint inspection that was gone out between my office and those 2 departments. And I believe that there were people living in like basement units, like kind of the scenarios I described before, and they were actually put up in hotels. And I believe, and this is where I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that ultimately is the responsibility of the property owner to reimburse for that. But I'm not 100% certain on that. that scenario. And there was a second one in, another one in South Norwalk where someone had converted a multifamily and had at least 2 or 3 illegal units. And they were running extension cords from one unit to the other one to power things in the unit. And that was another one. They had, I think, an illegal business in there too. And I think the city went in with 3 or 4 departments and actually shut it all down and relocated everybody that was in there. So if there is like a multifamily situation and it's unsafe, they will get located to safer quarters.
Okay, because that was my question. I was like, I really wanted to help, but I didn't want to then put them out on the street. So it was sort of, what do you do in these situations? But it's good to know that there is some kind of protocol. Thank you.
Yeah, but if that happens in a single or 2 family, it's a completely different set of rules. Unless there was some, excuse me, I think we had one, we were working with the health department on a blight issue, same with the fire marshal. We could tell there was a potential hoarding situation. We were very concerned, and
Mhm.
it's like, but it's a single family. We were trying to, are there different angles with, like, are there kids there where maybe we could try to get a state agency involved? And so it's that's where it gets tricky, is the single and 2s are really a different ballgame versus the multi.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's a good segue. We also have Kirk McDonald here from the Fire Marshal's Department. I don't know if Kirk, you want to weigh in on any of the safety issues around illegal apartments or what you see from the Fire Marshal's standpoint.
Sure. First of all, Steve, good job with your explanation of the illegal apartments. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. But Steve's absolutely right when it comes to jurisdiction and getting into those places. One of the most common scenarios that actually does get us into the door of 1 and 2 families is typically if there is say a medical call, or maybe the police go there for something. As long as they're there, if they see something which isn't right, or maybe identifying an apartment that's unsafe, whether they're deeming illegal or whatever, they can contact us. And as long as somebody there holds the scene, like if it's a fire call, medical call, if our fire officers are there, they'll contact us. And as long as they're holding the scene, once we get there, we can determine if there's some sort of resources that we can utilize to bring in. And depending on the safety of the situation, is it something that is easily fixed by adding a couple of smoke detectors, or is it something that gets a little more complicated, such as having the family relocated?
Thank you so much. I think it's 2-pronged. It's just the safety of our residents, and then also knowing what makes up an illegal apartment and keeping, there's the people who want to understand what an illegal apartment is and potentially report it. As some constituents I've spoken with have mentioned, potentially running landscaping or construction businesses out of a single family home and in an apartment, and there's a bunch of people coming in and out. Those were the types of complaints I had gotten, but mostly we just want everybody to be safe. Councilmember Revelous, do you have a question or comment?
I do. So listening to everything in and out, I'm sorry, but I think clarification just keeps hitting me, like on a renter's, on an owner's perspective, on a neighborhood perspective. Just, I may be a little bit naive to this because I've only gone through it where I've actually been a tenant once, had a full apartment, didn't realize that for their speculation, for the rules for it, it was considered illegal. Had a full kitchen, bathroom, full bedrooms, the works. So I just think my question is I just keep bringing clarification. Is it easy to obtain? How often do we actually let our owners or tenants or residents, not to cause a situation of, again, not being able to live safely, or people even telling on each other in a sense, but can there ever be a time when there's not clarification that they don't even realize what they're doing, that this is illegal? Does it always look like they know? Does it always look like our owners, residents, neighbors understand what illegal apartments would look like, should look like, or refer to as?
You know, that's a good question. We've actually kind of come across some circumstances where an individual may buy a home with, say, a basement apartment and not even be aware that it doesn't meet the specific,
Qualifications.
qualifications to be legal. And it may be something as simple as just not having the proper ceiling height. So there are those
Right.
who, who may think that it's illegal, but it's really not.
So like, I guess in that question, because I know I'm sure there's like a .com to go to, I'm sure of it. But like, how often do we show these clarifications? Because it's just like you said, there's sometimes you really don't know, like you really don't know. And especially if you're trying to help someone out or rent something. Now, if you know your lights are out or whatever, you know what you're doing at least is wrong. But just sometimes people just really don't know that this is considered an illegal apartment. What are those qualifications that they can verify, look, see, update? How often is it updated? Does it need to be? Like, I guess that's my question. The clarification, how easily is it to access on all realms? Who verifies it and who lives it?
I could probably add a little bit to that. So there's different, so sometimes illegal apartments are gorgeous. They're beautiful units, and
Right.
they're well done, and they're really nice,
Right.
but they're completely illegal one way or
Right.
another. It's just the way it goes. But
Right.
then I think the bigger issue is to some of the conversation we were having earlier is some of these are just, units that no one should live in under any circumstances, but they're, sometimes the individuals there, that's all they can afford. And I forgot who, I apologize, I don't remember who mentioned it, but you have a situation where somebody's so desperate to have a roof over their head that they'll take anything they can live in, which is, I think, what we want to avoid. But I think the majority, like if you were just a renter and you're looking to rent, unless you're getting good advice from a realtor or you've got like, say it's a young couple, for example, that I know people that I've worked with that have like, my first place I rented, it turns out, was an illegal apartment. At the time, I wouldn't have thought about an illegal apartment or known what an illegal apartment was
Right.
or why it wasn't illegal.
Right.
Because it could look like any other apartment. It just, it has a kitchen, it's got a bedroom, it's got a bathroom, but it's just, they're not
And
supposed
more
to
than
be.
likely, you wouldn't be looking for, most people in those predicaments would be found at word of mouth or on an ad. Like when I did it, it was back in the day when you could get it in the paper, right? The ads, it's there. So a lot of those apartments, you're not using a realtor. You kind of find them, and they again could be amazing, gorgeous, whatever. I'm just, not to beat it in the head, I just think that there's some place in space where even on all sides where we can clarify what we're looking out to, then even help a constituents. Because I think a while ago I've been called for that same area behind Low, not understanding if that was B or A. So someone called me talking about, well, it looks like there's a lot going on here, So I'm just wondering if it's not, it's okay. But if there is a place to clarify this for everyone, so you then know, should I be calling and who I should be calling, That's my last, I'll end it.
Yeah, and I don't know, Kurt might be able to share more light on this, but I think there might be a list of multifamily, but I don't know if that's going to help anybody, because it might say that building A has 13 legal units, but if you're renting, how do you know what the 13 units are if there's 15 or 16 on the property? So it's,
I think I mean more like in last, but I think more like, if your apartment has this, doesn't have this, looks like this and that, you may probably be in an illegal apartment type thing. I'm not saying let's tell on the street. I'm saying, how do we clarify, what am I looking at as an illegal apartment?
yeah, I think they come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, I think
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you can get a sense
So there's
of.
no like fall in like 1, 2, 3. If you see this, then, okay, I get it. I get it. It just
Yeah, I
comes
mean,
in.
I can give you a
Okay.
example of my own, like, travels that like going on
Mhm.
Airbnb a few different times where I got, a couple places I rented, was in a really nice single family neighborhood, but it was like the directions you got for the house, like, don't walk this specific direction, but don't be loud and be very careful of not making noise. Like, it's like they were trying to hide the fact that they had this Airbnb there. And I think that's the
Right,
same thing
right.
if somebody's going to rent an apartment and the landlord's telling them, don't use this entrance, be very, if they're being kind of odd with some of their requirements, that might be something to raise a red flag.
I get it. All right.
I've-
I thank you so much.
I think maybe what you might be looking for is maybe something we can do in the future is, put some information on the city's website or on the, the fire
Mhm.
zoning website to really state some of the requirements,
Right, yeah.
such
That's,
as,
yeah,
an apartment, bedrooms need a certain size window to qualify as an escape window. There
yes,
needs to be a ceiling height, of at least 7 feet.
Yeah.
You need to have, smoke detectors, CO detectors, in outside the sleeping areas,
Right.
at each level of the home.
Right.
And a lot of this information can be found, with a Google search, because most areas, it's really all the same as far as those
Mhm.
requirements. And as far as the fire department is concerned, or the fire marshal's office, we really, we focus on, does it have proper smoke and CO detection as well as egress, your number of ways out. And like you can't have an apartment in in an attic if all you have is, a pull down set of stairs kind of thing,
Right,
And-
like exact, and I said there was a .com probably, but if we had that clearly for Norwalk, even though it's nationally, but you're spot on what I'm asking. So thank you
That
so
is
much.
that's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think that's a really great idea because I'm always about, making it very obvious what the rules are and aren't and communicating that very clearly to our constituents. So it just kind of can smack them in the face almost, because I think we're also
Right.
guilty of that from time to time. I know I certainly do. Steve, I was wondering if you could just talk us through, if somebody does come across something that they feel is illegal, how do they go about reporting that to your department, or what are the channels that they can report that to you?
Sure. So whether they think there's like if they're complaining because their neighbor is doing something they find suspicious, or B, they're looking to, maybe to Ms. Revolucion's point, if somebody has a question like, I don't know if this is legal or not illegal, they really would have to check with planning and zoning to see how many units were on the property. So what we'd have to do is kind of what I'd outlined before. We'd have to go back and pull old permits, check that against old tax cards and say, wait a minute, we'd say, all right, we're told there's 4 apartments on the site, but we have a permit from 1996 that says finished kitchen and 3-family house. Then we would say, wait a minute, there's an extra unit there. So the likelihood that the unit you're looking at could be illegal is much higher. The same thing with a complaint. They have to file the complaint with us either through customer service, we have, I actually think you can do it from the P&Z webpage. You can email zoning permits. There's a link on our page that indicates that. And I think on our page, there's a how do I, and that's one of the drop downs is file a complaint.
That's great. Does anybody else have any other questions for Councilmember Alterman?
I just had one comment. I heard a lot of, so sorry, I can't figure out how to turn my camera back on. I heard a lot of comments about saying like families that can only afford a certain amount. I forgot to add the most shocking part of that one situation. And like, I was in 15 of that same situation with different variations, different degrees. They were paying like $1,600. They were paying $1,800. It was, and I think they were just worried nobody else would rent to them. And some of them literally had only been here like a week or two. They had just immigrated here. And so they trusted some other family to say, look, we live here and it's not too much of a problem, or it was better than where they came from. But that was the shocking thing to me, how much money they were paying. And so I was like, perhaps in the future, there is some way the city can come up with something if they, if people can afford to pay, but they still deserve to be safe and things like that. Maybe there are some other avenues, but that's all. I just wanted to point that out. It was obscene how much money the people were charging for the situation they were living in.
Yeah, I think it comes back to safety and we want all of our residents to be safe. We know there's, an affordable housing issue nationwide. And actually a bunch of us just came off of an ad hoc affordable housing committee meeting where we're trying to work on that. So I think it's two-pronged for sure. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kleppen and Kirk McDonald. I really appreciate you guys coming and speaking with us. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure they would welcome you reaching out to them offline as well, if anybody thinks of anything. With that, I want to just let everybody know that our November meeting is canceled because it is actually scheduled for Thanksgiving, and I don't think anybody wants to have turkey with a side of Public Safety and General Government Committee. So that's my one joke for the evening. Does anybody else have anything else they want to bring up before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none, I hope everybody has a great holiday. Be safe this Halloween. I know that the fire and police department posted a lot of really great tips for trick or treating this coming Monday. About your costumes and making sure that you wear reflections when you're out at night and just being safe, but having a lot of fun too, of course. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. She
Thank you
did
so
it.
much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Have a great night, you guys.
Night.
Take care.
If you see something, say something.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Always a good reminder.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.